Good afternoon. Please welcome your Nacio President, Dennis Goulet.
Wow, time flies. It's really hard to believe this is the last session of the Midyear Conference. Thank you all for joining us, enriching the conversations and strengthening the Nacio community. Please continue to access the conference hub after this event. It will be live with on-demand sessions and will house basic information after that as well. While the interaction on the hub will of course decline, you can still take advantage of the great wisdom and resources left behind on the community board. You can also find colleagues through the participant roster. This afternoon, we will start with a brain break. EY has produced a piece on mindfulness, which will help us shift from networking in the virtual hallway to talking resiliency within state government. After the brain break, our panel will be up and ready to go. That includes moderator Mark Raymond, CIO of Connecticut and Nacio past president. He is joined by Stephanie Dedman, CIO of Tennessee, and Dan Shennock, Executive Director for IBM Center for the Business of Government. Enjoy the brain break, and then welcome to the panel.
Hi, my name's Cliff Smith, and I'm the author of the best-selling book Mindfulness Without the Bells and Beads. I'm also Ernst & Young's foremost advisor on mindfulness, and today we're going to do a basic awareness of breath meditation for your brain break. So wherever you happen to be, I invite you to sit up just a bit more straight in your chair and allow your feet to be flat on the floor. You can place your hands anywhere that feels comfortable for you. You don't have to hold them in any special way. And I invite you to close your eyes if that feels comfortable. Otherwise, you can lower your gaze down at about a 45-degree angle and soften your focus. And the whole point behind closing your eyes is just to eliminate visual distraction. And so we're sitting up a bit more straight, feet flat on the floor, eyes closed perhaps. And take your attention and notice any sensations at all that you can perceive where the floor is supporting your feet. You might notice sensations of pressure. You might notice tingling sensations. You might notice warmth or coolness, some kind of a temperature perception. You may notice there's a lack of sensations. This is perfectly fine. We're not trying to make any sensations happen. We're just noticing what's here. And now become aware of the fact that you're breathing. And shift your attention to focus on wherever you can feel the sensations of breathing most prominently. Now that might be noticing the sensations of air coming in and out of your nose as you inhale and exhale. It could be noticing the sensations associated with the rising and falling of your chest or your abdomen as you breathe in and breathe out. Any of these places is perfectly fine to focus on for this exercise. If you have trouble noticing these sensations, it's okay to go ahead and take one or two deeper breaths intentionally. Just to get a sense of where you can notice these sensations most prominently, and then release the impulse to control or manipulate the breath in any way. This isn't a breathing exercise. This is an exercise of attention and awareness. So we're noticing the sensations for the full duration of each in-breath and the full duration of each out-breath. Now you may find after a few moments that the mind gets caught up in a thought, or perhaps a judgment. Maybe a judgment about the exercise you're doing right now, or how well you think you're doing it. There may be thoughts about what's still on your to-do list for today or something else. When this happens, it's not a mistake. Just notice what the mind got caught in, and then gently but firmly guide your attention back to noticing the sensations of breathing. And this mind wandering will happen again and again and again. So if your mind wanders 500, 5,000, or 50,000 times, just noticing what the mind got caught in and escorting your attention back to the breath each and every time. Where's the mind now? If it's moved from the breath, just notice where it went and guide it back to the breath. And as the exercise comes to a close, perhaps asking yourself, what's important now? And then allow, if you can, what comes up in response to that question to help inform the next moment of your day so that you can move forward with intention. And whenever you're ready, I invite you to open your eyes and bring your attention back into the room you're in, and then transition into the next part of your day. Thank you.
Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for the walk-up bumper. I appreciate that. Welcome everyone, and I'll start with an apology because we're going to take you from Cliff's wonderful, soul-soothing, breathing, focused, a sense of calm to the one that's got gets your heart pumping and your feet and palms sweaty, and really challenges the day of every CIO, and it's the topic of resilience. So I'm thrilled. I'm Mark Raymond. I'm thrilled to be with you today as we close out our 2021 Midyear Conference. And I'm excited to really be joined by two super talented colleagues, Stephanie Dedman and Dan Chinook. Today, we're exploring the topic of resilience. And so, Wikipedia says it's the ability to respond, absorb, and adapt to, as well as recover from a disruptive event. And we have all had our share of disruptive events over the last 15 months, and if not more. So we're going to talk a little bit about the concepts of, how do we prepare as state governments for this, for the unknown? How is resilience, how does it become a part of our systems and our people and the partners that we choose and rely upon? And what's the role of technology, and specifically of that of a CIO? So we'll raise the energy, raise the attention to the topic of dealing with uncertainty and uncertain events. And let's get started by getting to know our panel a little bit better and exploring some of their moments of resilience. So over the past year or even longer. So we'll get started with Stephanie. Stephanie, you've been through an amazing amount of events in your tenure, from tornadoes and the pandemic to the Christmas Day bombing in downtown Nashville. Can you talk a little bit about what you learned about yourself and your team? Maybe your state, and any leadership lessons that you've picked up about resilience along the way.
Yes, thank you, Mark. And 2020 was a hard year for many of us in the city of Nashville and the state of Tennessee. We feel like we had our fair share, as Mark was walking us through a few events. I think the one thing that I learned about myself in each of these situations is if you think about others, it makes you worry less about yourself. And I was personally impacted by the tornado. Everyone was fine, but it was easier for me to focus on work and what happened at our data center and what did we need to be doing. It made it easier not to worry about myself during those early days of both the tornado and the Christmas Day explosion in downtown Nashville. What I learned from my team is that people do what they need to do. They came together, we executed our plans, we leaned on each other, and we got the work done. And that's what you always hope from your team, but it did play out for us during those events. I think what I learned about our state and our leadership specifically is that, you know, we came together and communicated, and I guess this plays out specifically for the pandemic and then the Christmas Day event. We pulled together the commissioners, and one of the lessons learned I would share is that, you know, not to assume that you understand how people are impacted. And what I mean by that is, as we brought the agency commissioners together the afternoon of Christmas Day, and we had to make sure we asked them, how are you impacted? How are you impacted? Because the agency that you're in and the people you serve can be different than your counterparts, and just understanding any nuances. For instance, we don't often think about the mental health hospitals that we have, and where are they located, and do they have power, and do they have services? And so that's just an example of, I think sometimes it's easy to assume, well, I know everybody needs the network, and I know everybody needs email up and running, and we need phones, but it's just so much more of that. So I guess the other lessons learned is to lean on our vendor partners. I had many folks, many of our vendor partners reach out in the early days of the tornado to offer whatever help, and that meant a lot. And so and relationships start before that. You know, build your relationships along the way, so that when you need people, you've had a couple of meetings, you know the strengths, and you know who you're going to be working with. But those are just some of the lessons learned that shine through for me personally.
Yeah, and you've handled it brilliantly. So thank you for, you know, all that you've done for your state, and you know, it's having people like you to help shepherd folks through those kinds of challenges that make all the difference. Dan, IBM's been exploring the concepts of resiliency through the Center for the Business of Government. Tell us about how some of that research may have come to life for you over the past year.
Sure, Mark, and thanks. It's really an honor to be on this discussion with you and Stephanie, and great to be back with Nacio. In my past, I was the Office of Management and Budget in the federal government. I was the leader of the Technology Policy Office there, so it was the position that would now be sort of the deputy federal CIO for the U.S., and worked with Nacio often in that capacity, and have enjoyed collaboration since. So really terrific to be back with you all for the conference today. And our center, as you noted, Mark, does a lot of research. We work with academic experts primarily, who are doing cutting edge research in topics of interest to government. And one of our research areas for many years has been risk and resilience, and how the government can respond. And in the last year, of course, that proposition has been tested as never before. And the tools that governments at all levels have used, like enterprise resource management, like strategic foresight, have been pushed to the limit in terms of sort of how do you combine those good planning tools and good management tools with the need to respond quickly and immediately at a scale level never seen before from the pandemic. We took a couple of looks at this in the last year. One was around a series of essays that primarily focused on state and local efforts to respond in terms of service and operation. And we had a number of authors, including from government enterprises themselves and from the International City County Management Agency, a number who kind of talked about the changing nature of work and how the pandemic really quickly sort of brought people to a new reality in terms of you know, not commuting, working from home, addressing the additional cyber risks that can entail, and the risks on network capacity. We also took a look at supply chain, and of course we've all seen the impact of good and poor supply chain management as never before in the last year, and took a look at a concept that we're calling supply chain immunity. Sort of how do you protect and harden a supply chain in advance against inevitable shocks that will continue, like those from the pandemic. And one of the leading scholars on supply chain management, Rob Hanfield from North Carolina State University, did a terrific piece on that with some great insight. The other research we did in the last year was actually written by another very prominent scholar, Catherine Willoughby, and a couple of colleagues. she looked at sort of best practices in local disaster management. This wasn't looking at the pandemic specifically. It was actually looking more at the sort of the suite of natural disasters, emergency responses, and how to build resiliency, both in the planning for, so you have a sort of a more better preparation and better capacity to absorb shocks when they come, but also in the aftermath, and how a whole of community, whole of state, whole of nation effort can be much more powerful than if each office tries to handle things on their own. So sort of building in those collaborative response mechanisms can be a powerful response in terms of resiliency after the fact, and then recovering to what can often, and we've seen certainly now, be described as a new normal that we'll be living with for a number of years. So we continue to do this kind of research. We have a research agenda that we just released that invites academics to additionally look at state governments, local governments, national governments, and how they can best learn from one another in terms of risk and resiliency. And we look forward to the discussion. Thanks.
Thanks, Dan. I know that we've all had many sort of extraordinary stories that have literally saved lives over the last 16 months about our resilience and how we've planned for and how we've reacted to the unknown. While the Colonial Pipeline didn't necessarily affect us here in Connecticut in a dramatic way, we had a tabletop exercise last year around a dark sky event for that specific outage. It was in the middle of winter, so it was much more impactful for us. But the idea of being planful for it, and it was somewhat striking to me. The other thing that really fascinates me about this topic is when we look back on were we resilient or were we not? Did we plan well or did we not? It's really hard to compare against the road not taken, right? So in Connecticut, we had the fortune of having our cloud-based collaboration tools in place or an agreement in place and we're in the process of rolling that out when the pandemic hit, and we were able to get everyone in to that environment, including the security that came with it, super quick. I don't have anything to compare to, if that had not been in place, what would we have done? How less resilient might we have been? So fascinating for us to all look back on this at some point when we're writing books about making it through this time, what was resilient and what wasn't. So let's pivot for a little bit. Marcus Buckingham wrote an article for the Harvard Business Review on the topic of really what makes us resilient. And in that article, there were two factors that were cited as contributing to an increase in resilience. And I thought that they were sort of poignant. So the first was the exposure to suffering. So that the closer you were to some kind of personal suffering, and it can be professional or otherwise, the closer you were, the more resilient you became. The second function was the amount of change that came from the disruption. So the size of the disruption, and that what they found was that the greater the change that occurred, the greater that the resilience that were borne by the people who came out of that process. And so in thinking about this session and thinking about the article, it struck me that perhaps he was almost describing resilience as a muscle in a way, that it required use and practice. And I am not wishing a pandemic on anyone, right? For what we've just been through. We're all hoping that we pull out of that soon. But Dan, from your research, does this ring true about government?
Well, certainly we've seen research look at practice as critical. The study I mentioned that looked at the local disaster management capacity across the nation saw that there was a trend that when states and localities did exercises in advance and sort of had people understand what their role was, that it led to better results following a disaster, and that's to be expected. Another thing that helps with, I think, is the risk communication effort, because the public doesn't normally think about what could go wrong. They kind of go about their lives, and then when something goes wrong, they have a very significant reaction to the incident. And if they know that, just like you have to put on your seatbelt when you get in the car to protect yourself against a potential accident, and that's sort of built into their psyche. If they know what research has shown that behaviorally, if they know that risks can occur, they can more calmly, more rationally work with government officials and their local communities in response. And so research that we've done has shown that. And then another piece of research we did that was actually written by Sherry Greenberg at the University of Texas looked at how communities can come together and communities that are affected by you talked about closeness and kind of magnitude of harm, closest to the harm, magnitude of harm. And those can be very powerful incentives for state and local officials to come together in an operational capacity and react quickly, because as though something's coming in that really unifies them in ways that they couldn't have before.
Yeah, fascinating. I see that occurring in how people are thinking right now about what comes next. Fascinating. Stephanie, how did the practice that you did before the events that you underwent shape how you responded? And do you look differently at that need to prepare or the time that it needs to be placed in that area, as you look at it in retrospect?
Yes. I think from what we practiced, we learned and we're able to put into place just the methodical, what's the first thing we do? What's the second thing? What's the third thing? I think what you can't practice necessarily is how you will really feel in the heat of the moment or under pressure or, whatever, however you want to describe the situation. And so I think one of the things we learned is calm, to be calm. I mean, people really do, and this is said often and is true. People look to take their cue from leadership, and so I think the first thing we tried to do was all be calm and keep our heads about us. And it's hard to practice that because when it's practice, you're not really truly feeling the real pressure of a situation. But as Dan was saying, communication was important, and we practiced that. We practiced the chain. Who do we need to pull to the table? Who do we need to make sure is involved? The only thing I would say that has changed how we plan is just to try to incorporate the lessons learned from all three events for us: the tornado, the pandemic, and the Christmas Day event. And if your point about resilience is like a muscle, then I should have been Wonder Woman by the time we got to Christmas Day. But at any rate, and I don't mean to be disrespectful about that last event because it was quite awful for our city, but just incorporating our lessons learned, updating the plans, and continuing to do testing because it does pay off, and practice does make close to perfect. Maybe not perfect because there is no true perfection in IT, but practice is good.
Yeah. When I think about where we are and what we've done to get to this point, it really makes me, question how much of the disruption should we have seen or should really have been unknown. We can't, as you were saying, Stephanie, we can't prepare in detail for every kind of possibility that we have in front of us. But I do look back at where we were and what kind of planning that we had done on the subject, and things like avian flu and bird flu and pandemic planning. Like the state had done a bunch of planning around that and had documents on how we might respond to that. Same as I mentioned our dark sky cyber tabletop. Done more recently. We've begun to train some patterns, and while some of those preparations were dated in the specific things that they had in there, they all informed our thought process, right? That allowed us to react in ways that were really meaningful to improved outcomes. I was struck from your earlier answer, Stephanie, about relying on people, right? On local government, on partners, and that how resilience increased resilience also comes with increased reliance, especially in the technology world that we have around us. And so that, the more partners that we have in our delivery ecosystem, the more that we rely upon them to deliver our services. But having multiple channels to conduct our business was one of the keys for us being as resilient as we were. So early on, I said we moved our collaboration tools. Early on, we had some of that still on premise, and had some delivery email issues in the early days of the pandemic because it was overloading. All the people were outside and using it from the outside, and we hadn't moved everyone to the cloud yet. And so we created different channels, right? So we moved broad communications out to a broadcast system that we had in place, and began to move some segments of our communication into text messaging, Twitter updates. Like we used a lot of different ways to ensure communications and ensure our resilience by having multiple different ways to solve and communicate. And I think that understanding your partners and not having just one, right, that to provide a different solution allows us to become more resilient in the event that any one thing is impaired. Well, let's move to two faster questions to help liven the pace a little bit as we come down to the line here. So what was the most resilient application of technology that you've seen? Stephanie, to you.
Well, I recently learned, it's not something we've implemented in Tennessee, but I recently learned about this this chaos monkey, specifically with Netflix. And so this chaos monkey is responsible for randomly terminating instances in production to ensure that the engineers can implement their services to be resilient in the future. And so I just find that terribly interesting and thought-provoking and innovative of just, and if you think about Netflix, how much we all rely, or maybe I shouldn't say all, many of us, are heavy users of Netflix. And it's a pretty steady, reliable, delivery of services. And so it's just an interesting technology to inject problems into your production environment to just constantly be prepared to react. So again, we haven't started that in Tennessee, but I find that incredibly interesting.
I think it's brilliant that they should tell people about the topic. So, when streaming Outlander, and it stops, they're gonna say blame it on Chaos Monkey, right? So they've got a built-in explanation for service disruptions. That's pretty cool. Dan, how about you? What when you think about the most resilient application of technology, what do you think about?
One resilient use was actually in the artificial intelligence area that we saw in the last year, and this was in Syracuse, New York, where they used AI to drive a much greater performance improvement in the traffic light system around the city by taking into consideration sort of the time of day, what type of weather, pollution, angle of the sun, all these different elements that enabled traffic flow more effectively. And you could imagine that could go wrong in any number of ways in how it's applied, unless it's applied very carefully, because if you do it wrong, the traffic will pile up and people then blame the system. So they did a lot of good planning, sort of building that resiliency in up front that we talked about earlier. They talked about security and privacy and building that into the system to make sure that a hacker couldn't get in and kind of, reroute the lights to do harm. They talked about how this application sat on the cloud that they worked on, and sort of they just sort of separated that. So they went to an external cloud provider, and the system kind of worked on that. So there wasn't a one failover to the same system within the city's infrastructure. And they even thought about political risk and they brought in a third party to do some evaluation of the program. So they looked at several different aspects of risk and resilience and did a nice job in the rollout.
Great, thank you. For me, it's probably a little bit more mundane. It's the smart device. It's the smartphone. Like when I think about its ability to have a cellular signal or a Wi-Fi signal to be able to employ calls and messaging and internet browsing. Like the resilience of that platform, I think, has made a huge difference in the flexibility of bringing new applications to bear, whatever they might be, and for us, multi-factor authentication, improving our security through the use of this sort of resilient platform has made just a world of difference for me, when I look at where we are as a society. Okay, so we learn the best as humans through stories. For our last segment, last question, share, if you would, your proudest personal or professional moment of resilience. What made it that way for you, and what lessons lies in that for state CIOs? We'll start with Dan.
So I'll put on my IBM hat. We are a company in 170 countries with 400,000 people, and at the pandemic, obviously, we all had to, like as with the rest of the world and many governments at many levels, kind of had to pivot on a dime. And within a week, we were basically, 95 to 98% virtual, had people working at home, had the systems to be able to do that. And in my center in particular, we do a lot of in-person convenings and hosting events and sessions. And we have now become very adept at the world of the online conference, online event, just like we are today. And I'm proud of our team for working through that, for working with our government partners in the many activities that we've had in the last year online. And today's conference, I think, is a great example of how the technology community has come together as a whole, and we can all be proud to be part of that community. And I don't think this is going away. I think that the hybrid world will be with us. We'll be at virtual conferences with people Zooming in, probably for years to come.
I agree. There's some great and some that we need to throw off to the wayside, but it's not going away. Stephanie, how about you? Tell us about your proudest moment.
I'm gonna go with a personal story because it'll kind of bring it home to Nacio and our state CIOs. So I mentioned earlier that I was personally impacted by the tornado. My husband and I were living in one of the apartment buildings downtown that was severely hit by the tornado. So we were evacuated at 12:45 in the morning. And we were fine. We did have to move out. But Doug Robinson was one of the first people who texted me to ask if I was okay. Several of my CIO brothers and sisters also texted that day and that week to see how, if I was okay, how the state was faring. Our data center was in the path of the tornado, though it stood up very well. And so the reason why I'm proud of that is just we talk about Nacio, we talk about supporting each other, and it is alive and well and very meaningful. And so for CIOs, I think the lesson that coming out of that is, lean on others because others do want to be there for you, and take care of each other in times of need, because it does mean a lot and it does come around.
Yeah, I couldn't, as a veteran of the community, I could not emphasize that more. A great collaboration and sharing, not just of our CIO brothers and sisters, but the whole partner community who make this a really, really special place. For me, it's also a quick personal story about, personal resilience and the journey that I've been through in the past year with my daughter and social justice and really understanding, more about myself and pushing myself through the process to think differently, to learn more, to understand that as a human, there's more to it than just what meets the eye, and that creating an inclusive environment, It's no one else's job, it's mine, right? So it's all of our individual roles. And I think, that reliance on others, that ability to be resilient, is only enhanced by having all the voices at the table, being able to listen to them, have them be comfortable about being able to weigh in and make sure that we're making the best decisions along the way. So it's been a fabulous year of resilience all around. And I like to bring today's this topic to a close by, saying thank you to Stephanie. Thank you to Dan. Thank you to all of you who are participants in this session for doing your part in helping us serve in government those people who need it most. So Dennis, I will turn things over to you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. What a great job. One of the things I've always enjoyed about Nacio content is that combination of practical and experiential information combined with research to kind of make a whole picture. And Mark, Stephanie, and Dan, you all did a great job of really pulling that together. And honestly, it really made me think. Some of those questions, Mark, I was like, whoa, thinking back, trying to answer them in my own head, and it was fun doing so, and moving as well. I mean, resilience is so important and so moving. And I think that we as a species are quite resilient. And I think we've proven that recently. Before we conclude the conference, there's a very special recognition to be made. We know that as an appointed position, the role of CIO can be volatile. As of May, the median tenure of state CIOs is 21 months. It is fitting that Mark Raymond moderated the previous session on resiliency in state government, as he is the second longest serving state CIO and will hit a big milestone in just a few days. Mark, I'll ask you to join me on screen as we present you the Decade of Leadership recognition. In Mark's 10 years of service to the state of Connecticut, he has led the state to new ways to both think and do technology. In all of his activities and actions, he takes the long perspective. What is best for the state, the region, and the industry in general? Mark is that special leader who understands how to move an organization forward, even in the face of serious constraints. He has also been an integral part of Nacio. Mark has served in most every leadership role possible: chair of multiple committees, executive committee member, secretary treasurer, vice president, and president. His involvement continues on the executive committee as past president, providing a valuable perspective. Mark, thank you for your service to your state, the IT community, and to Nacio. And Mark, thank you for your mentorship and friendship from a personal perspective. We're putting you on the spot, but I invite you to share a few thoughts about your tenure.
Thanks for the surprise, Dennis. As always, I love you all. It's an amazing community, and what we're doing is something that few have the privilege to do, and I look at it that way. Being able to apply technology to serve our agencies and the public in ways that very few will ever understand, and the enhancing that is Nacio and engaging in Nacio. So being an active role in that is an easy thing, right? It's something that doesn't add to your day. It actually helps you with the rest of your day. So resilient, yeah. I've been through a lot. Connecticut has its challenges, but it is that approach that we're always have an opportunity to do better, and by listening to each other, learning from our awards, the submissions that are out there, and the brilliant people like Stephanie and Dennis and Mike and Cal, the whole crew. we just we pass through these rules and look to help each other along the way. So I don't look to go anyplace anytime soon, but I'll be resilient with that as well. And if there's any of you I can help, happy to do that as well. So thank you, Nacio. Thank you, brothers and sisters on the call, and I look forward to really seeing all of you in person sometime soon. So thanks for the recognition.
Thank you, Mark, and we do look forward to seeing you as well. It's great working with you, and we'll continue to do so. And let's have a drink soon in Seattle, or maybe even at a New England CIO meeting this summer on my boat.
Got it.
All right. This brings us to the end of the Nacio Midyear Conference. Thank you to all the speakers, sponsors, and attendees. You are what makes the Nacio community so strong. Remember that you catch all the sessions on demand through the hub starting next week until early July. As we head into Memorial Day weekend, may we all take a moment to reflect on the men and women that served this country and made the ultimate sacrifice. We hope to see you in person in Seattle this October. Look for updates over the summer. Thanks again for joining. Take care, everybody.